Coming up on today's show.
I didn't know what it was good for, but I knew that it was cool. It felt cool. And so I think, I've just been trying to chase after that cool feeling from when I was in, eighth grade or whatever, for my entire professional life, just trying to find the place where and how to do that. And I think I landed on something maybe when I wrote that essay, Design, Science, Fact, and Fiction, that kind of led to kind of instantiating, saying out loud design fiction, because it felt like it held some sense of that. It was an architecture. It was an architecture around that woku feeling. It was an explanation of it I didn't have the language when I was in eighth grade. I couldn't describe in any kind of like really thoughtful way. I had to get 2 engineering degrees and a PhD in history of consciousness to be able to find the way to say, oh, wait, that's what I've been doing.
Welcome to the Think Forward Show. I'm your host, Steve Fisher. Today, we're venturing into one of my absolute favorite territories, the mesmerizing world of design fiction. There's something magical about holding an artifact from a future that doesn't exist yet. A newspaper headline from 2045, or a product manual for technology that hasn't been invented, or a social media post from an entirely different world. These aren't just creative exercises. They're powerful tools for making the abstract future tangible. And there's nobody better to guide us through this than today's guest, Julian Bleecker. Julian isn't just a practitioner of design fiction. He's one of the pioneering architects. From Nokia to his groundbreaking super seminars, Julian has transformed design fiction from a niche academic concept into something that shapes real conversations about innovation and the kind of world we want to build. Today, we'll explore how creating artifacts from imaginary tomorrows is more powerful than writing reports about them. We'll discover Julian's concept of value circulation in the creative community and why nurturing your imagination isn't just a nice to have. It's absolutely vital for navigating our rapidly changing world. So get ready to spark your imagination with one of the most innovative minds in the field. Welcome to episode 135, The Art of Design Fiction with Julian Bleecker. So welcome to the show. Gosh, it's funny how we've known each other these years and the field has changed. And I always start these episodes, we always kind of do the background stuff. And I think you've had just this amazing journey. I mean, you're a pioneer in the field. I mean, you created really kind of, you talk about design fiction as the moniker, but as obviously other forms of fiction have existed in terms of that before, but you've had this journey through like art and technology and design. Could you share, like, just tell people, who don't know you and then your path doing this into this field?
Yeah. How did I get to where I am?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of it kind of started, if I were to think back, with kind of really being into getting into electronics and computers, like when I was super young, like 8 years old or something. And it was just, I think it was a time, and also the place. So I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, which is a university town. So you're kind of, eh, for something that was emerging at the time, like, computers were around, but they were still not quite understood as to their potentiality, or there was like a fictional notion or a particular notion that came from fiction about what they were and what they were good for and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As you might see through like film, like war games, so everyone's seen war games. That was like,
Oh yeah.
what computers can do and the whole networking thing. So I got into that, and and it was just like a wonderful kind of imaginative space, because there still was a very blank canvas about what they were good for. You remember early days, like, I don't know, like, computers were being sold on the premise that they'd be a great way to keep your recipe box. You'd transfer all your recipes from the index cards into the computer. Isn't that great? And it was just so desperate to try to make sense of what it was from a marketplace, and kind of going through that as a kid, and building computers, because there were enough. This is like early. This isn't like building a PC. This was like, I remember going to this hobby fair, um, near town. I think it happened. It was like an amateur radio hobby fair kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
and you could get if you went there, you could get parts to build a Xerox 820. Now, the other computers were around, but there was a sensibility about building it yourself from the ground up and having it not be just something that was generally commercially understood. So it was different from building, getting an IBM PC.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was really building IBM PCs back then. Maybe they were. I can't remember, but
No, they were proprietary for like the XTs. Those were all cases, right? Same with the TRS, the Radio Shack TRS 80.
they did one.
I had a TI 99. My dad had the TRS. He had hidden floppy disks with his he's a civil engineer, so he did like a lot. It was water and sewer, like plotting, a lot of mathematics. He thought it was like he discovered fire because like things that would take massive amounts of time on calculators or slide rules, like just the fact you could plug in coordinates and it would like spit it out, snap of a finger. It was like, but we were, it was like you said, it was like the world's most expensive calculator, right? Yeah, but homebrewing was that was a totally different thing. And I don't, yeah, I mean, IBM tried to keep it almost like Apple, like they're enclosed ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, did you finish the Xerox? Is that what your first computer you built?
Yeah, the Xerox 820 with one 8-inch disk drive,
Hmm.
8-inch floppy disk drive. And it ran CPM, and I got a command prompt, and I was like, cool. And didn't, that was part of the exercise, I think. But
Yeah,
there was that just kind of feeling of something going on. And when you're in junior high building a computer, you're not necessarily sure exactly what that is. You're trying to make sense of it,
yeah,
but it's more the feeling and the vibe and the community, the group of, full on right from central casting computer nerds. The one kid who was always wearing a jacket inside, the one kid whose nose was always running. It was a whole thing. And doing that and then learning, ways to network computers like with modems, like that it was just like an exploration
yeah,
with the sense of what it was and what it meant was just pure imagination, only imagining what it was and what it could do. So there was no specific task. Sometimes you'd be like, oh, I'm gonna write a game program or something like that, but it was allowing the imagination to fill in that space of possibility implied by the computer culture. So you used to go to the Princeton Public Library and read Byte magazine. You'd read about what was going on, who was doing what, that stuff. I didn't know what it was good for, but I knew that it was cool. It felt cool. And so I think, I've just been trying to chase after that cool feeling from when I was in, eighth grade or whatever, for my entire professional life, just trying to find the place where and how to do that. And I think I landed on something, maybe when I wrote that essay, Design, Science, Fact, and Fiction, that kind of led to, kind of instantiating, saying out loud design fiction, because that felt like it held some sense of that. It was an architecture. It was an architecture around that woku feeling. It was an explanation of it using I didn't have the language when I was in eighth grade. I couldn't
mhm,
describe in any kind of like really thoughtful way. I had to get, two engineering degrees and a PhD in history of consciousness to be able to find the way to say, oh, wait, that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to get that. And now I've got to, professionally in a position where it's like I can say it out loud. Enough people will pay attention to it that I can then say, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I do. I'm still, it's like I got home. Like I finally
mhm,
kind of go back to that thing that I wanted, that I kind of vaguely felt when I was in eighth grade, you know, high school, whatever.
yeah,
And I found the way, and I was able to ride the challenges of not doing that in my commercial, phase of my life when I was working at a job. But I even remember like my first job at a college, which I was very excited to get, was at Data General. So this was just, basically when they were becoming irrelevant because PCs and workstations were becoming more prevalent. I mean, I remember, like Sun was on its ascendancy. So there's no more real need, or, or the opportunity for selling a department-wide computer called a mini computer was, it was kind of losing its traction. And I can remember feeling like this isn't that whoa cool feeling. Not the amazing story company. I mean, there was a Pulitzer Prize winning book written about the company called Soul of a New Machine. So they have an important place in the history of computation, and I am proud to have worked there, even though I didn't. I wasn't one of the figures in the book. But the point I'm trying to make is, like, I got to where I am, I think, by just kind of circling back to what I wanted, what I felt when I was in junior high, and that is to be able to create things that feel like they've come from a possible future. My imagination is just tuned up to, like, 8 on a scale of 10 while I'm doing the work of trying to, make imagine what the future could be. And I do that, mostly with blend of imagination, probably 80% imagination, 20% engineer, actual programmer,
Mhm.
which I think is somewhat, which is just great approach to doing work that you're going to do futures work. So I'll say, to that, it's like I wouldn't necessarily, with no aspersions, like I don't consider myself a futurist, I guess, in the general way in which it's used in the vernacular understanding of, like, what a futurist is probably, I feel less associated with that, because I don't feel like I predict or prognosticate so much as cr- create context for wondering and having conversations about what could be.
Well, it's interesting. You said the word predict. How would you define a futurist?
Hmm. Well, there are probably a lot of category, kind of semantic ways to get into that. One is like, are you a member of the whatever Association of Professional Future? That's one way. I mean, that's a category,
Yeah.
legitimate, and people use that to affiliate with, professionally, but also because it's a badge you can wear. I don't know if they make embroidered patches, but if they did, you could probably get one and wear it and put it on your, this is, I also belong to this affiliation on your LinkedIn page and that kind of thing. That's one way.
Mhm.
Another way is, I suppose, do you orient your activities and your whatever it is that you do professionally in the direction of what could be? Are you operating in that space? And that's a little bit less instrumental in terms of defining it, but it's like, are you, you know, I would, in that sense, like, you might say, and you might object, but you might say, like, well, I think Cory Doctorow is a futurist. He operates by thinking about what could be, both through his novels, but then also through his kind of more public, kind of discourse about how the internet's just a pile of shit and all that kind of stuff. So there are a bunch of different ways. I think the ways that are interesting to me are probably less, just personally, are probably less oriented towards, first, I guess, commercial objectives. Like, if I can get myself in a position where I can stand in front of people and charismatically hold forth on what they should be doing, I guess that's sort of a little bit less interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I'm more of, I enjoy making things that feel like they came from the future, as opposed to uh, starting out from a marketing perspective, I guess. Or something.
No, no, it's an honest. That's a great answer. It's an honest answer. I think being a futurist, there's many interpretations. Like you said, there's affiliation. Um, there's practice, and you're right. There's different. You and I are both design futurists, and if they want to label these things, because it's about communicating the future with, like, fiction or prototype. It's trying to synthesize the future in a way that people can touch and taste or read. They can experience it, right? Versus, and I put a differentiation between, I would call it the futures research, the strategic foresight. There's so many brands, so many names of it. I think there's also, for many years, my futures work was really stealthy, covert, because a lot of people just couldn't handle it, or they weren't, that's just not the way they operated. But in terms of doing innovation work or product work, you had to have that lens, right? You just brought the exercises in and, you bring it in a different way. I think the way the world has really become the acceleration of change, the visible acceleration of change combined with the uncertainty, caused by things like COVID, all this kind of other thing that people are more open to. How do I be resilient? How do I deal with this change that's coming at me? Some don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
but there's many that are looking at this as, okay, this is happening. How do I address it? And I always look at it as, futurists are never predictors. We look at possible futures. Like we look at the possibility of what eventually might become to pass as the present. And how do you navigate that? And I think what you do is so important because you try and put, whether it's completely speculative, people can connect to it and understand that there is, what does this look like? I always keep thinking about Jake Dunnigan's work on, and I think Stuart and him did it. It was like a flooding like if Rhode Island was like flooded, like what is the future of like that, and what did the city change? Like there are so many different ways to present possibility to people in a way that they can accept that and understand that. And I think that's one of the awesome things that you do is you're able to also teach people how to do it. So,
Yeah.
but for you, what's a good example for you that kind of encapsulates the approach? Like, if somebody listening, they hear the term design fiction, they might think of science fiction or stories or world built, like universes. What's a project you do that you think that really captures this for people?
Yeah. So I would go back to the project that had set a trajectory, which was TBD catalog.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
The thing about that I think gives a good explanation is that um, I I emphasize that the way in which it came into being, like what was the work to actually get there, so that it's the thing that I don't think you oftentimes see in some contexts. Like there's the catalog itself, the book, which you can buy, and then but then the book itself, without revealing too much about, without taking down the fourth wall,
Yeah.
is it also in there, it gives you a sense of like, oh, how this came into being, which was, in practical terms, it's like I just sent out an email to get a bunch of friends together to meet in Detroit to spend a few days having conversations, but then getting materializing what we thought the future might look like from that date. I think it was 2000, no, was it 2000, I don't know, 8, something like that. And we can have conversations, but what we want to do is we want to create a product catalog that feels like it came from the future, that we sort of think as a mixed group of people, artists, in designers, grad students, museum curators, all these kinds of people, design directors of major regional museums, to imagine a future, but not but produce on the other side of that a product catalog as if it came from the future. Can we make the product catalog tell the story of what we imagine this future might be? And so for me, that's the architecture of a really good design fiction project. That is to say, you workshop the topic, but the outcome of the workshop is an artifact that has come from that future. So that the output of it isn't primarily a PowerPoint deck that or a bunch of pictures of post-it notes. It's got to be something that allows people to wander into, with their imagination, what happened in that room, what people were thinking, but the explanation of what they were thinking isn't super didactic. It's just like, oh, here's a product. It's a I don't know. It's a Bitcoin mining machine, but it's not an abstraction. It's like it looks like a piece of it's sold at a particular price. It's described in a particular way. It's got a particular brand associated with it. And it's got a little bit of, kind of product reviews from consumers. So it starts to feel all of a sudden like, wait a minute, does this thing really exist? And I think that's the thing you want to get to is you want people to let their guard down
Mhm.
and when they're exposed to the artifact, whether it's a product catalog or a map or a newspaper, each of those have come from a future. You want them to be like, oh, this is just a newspaper. Wait a minute, hold on. Wait, what's going on here? And you want that little bit of a kind of a stumble where they're looking around and then they're looking to the left or right to look at someone and say like, hey, have you seen this? This is crazy. And once they're in that mode, now you're back to that whoa cool feeling, hopefully, where you're like, you're looking at the Xerox A20 with an 8-inch floppy. That's a big floppy. And you're looking at it and you're kind of like, whoa, what is this thing that you built? Imagine going into a world where computers weren't you weren't expecting to find a computer in the family room of an eighth grader on the floor, a bunch of parts and a power supply that's almost bigger than the computer itself. You're like, what is going on here? What is this about? And the kid's trying to explain to the adult who's like, "Wh- wait, so how does this? And you got to hook up to the television set? Like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. I remember.
You just want to get it, you want to get in that wondering feeling. And I don't think PowerPoint really does that well. So that's why I kind of, really emphasize making the thing that feels as if you see a PowerPoint, you kind of know what it is. Uh,
My it's that just totally sparked a memory. Like
mm,
when I had a TI, not my Texas Instruments, this is 1982, 83. You had a RS-232 peripheral that I eventually bought. It had floppy drives and all that stuff, but you could record your programming to a cassette tape,
oh, totally. I had a
cassette
terrible
recorder.
system. That's
Bro,
how that's how it
my
is.
father could not wrap his head around that.
Yeah.
That I could use a tape recorder that was usually for like mixtapes or recording like that you could record a computer program on it. He's like, that's on it. I'm like, yeah. And I played it and it was like all the garble.
Yeah.
And I'm like, watch. And I loaded it back into the system. And it was just like, I think it's because you put there's almost like this hard construct as you get older. That's just like, it's harder. It's almost like a thicker wall around the believability or the flexibility of thought. And it's funny that you talked about you brought up Bitcoin when it's so working in the space for a long time in the digital asset space. That was actually it's funny that sparked actually the reality of somebody miners use a lot of energy. So if you're a and it also generates it's a lot of heat. So somebody came up with the idea to create a Bitcoin miner that was two things. One, it was an actual space heater for your house, for your room. And because of the energy it produced, it would actually eventually pay your entire electric bill. And you'd
Mhm.
have a little bit. So your Bitcoin would heat your house, but pay your electric bill and maybe have a little bit left over. So it was it was the leap of the design fiction to kind of go, oh. And then some of these things people were like, well, can I do that? Can I actually create that?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of, I think, of this stuff is that it just gets people really connecting between the liminal space between the possible and even the probable. Like we could do this. Where with this things, when this comes, we could. And I think that's what I love about this so much, this
Mm.
space. So, um, when you bring together, you mentioned the super seminars. Where did that idea come about? Is it just you? What do you hope? What do you achieve with that? What do you love about that so much? If people haven't checked it out, I'll make sure it's in the show notes so people can check them out.
Yeah, cool. So there was a general seminar which started with the idea I don't know, it was like COVID and like there was lots of stuff going on. I'm not talking necessarily COVID stuff, but just like there was the crypto thing was going on and I was just doing a lot of like, whoa, I wasn't kind of expecting this so much um as and so I was wondering about it, and just kind of talking to people and at that during COVID, the online thing became kind of hygiene. Like everyone, not just kind of tech nerds or whatever, or work from home people, like started getting a fluency with doing seminars online and that kind of thing. And I had this, it was just I just put it out there like, hey, with a little bit of framing around it, uh, I want to be able to see if I can host a session where I don't have to, I'm not the expert in the room. I'm the I'm the guy who kind of, I don't know, just got things together. Like I like community building, maybe to a fault. Like, I don't think I should be doing tons and tons of that because I like to make stuff. Community building takes time. Is to if I
Well,
just
you're making a community. It is making something. It is in this in the sense of creating. You are creating connection. So, I
yeah, no, I take the point. It's I'm not opposed to it. It's just like
yeah.
the I wanted to see what would happen if I put something up and out there amongst the community. Basically people subscribed to my newsletter and said, hey, with a little bit of, kind of humor attached around it, could propose something where it's like, crypto, what the fuck, like, I don't know, like, do you have any ideas? And that was the general theme, or the kind of semantic structure around all these things. It's like, I don't know, do you? But I bet if we get together in a room, we can make some sense of it, maybe inconclusively. But what I didn't really have a lot planned for that, um, in particular. But there were a couple things. One thing I was like, would people pay for this? Is there real value here that they'll pay for? And that was a question for me, and I just kind of wanted to know as an experiment. And then the other thing was, could you have it was an experiment with the kind of structure of the seminar itself. In other words, what would happen if you led people on a kind of guided them into the future, told them that they're going to the future, and now I want you to explore, and almost like a Pilates for the imagination. Go into that world, and I want you to bring back some artifacts. You imagine that you ended up in someone's
Mhm.
uh, kitchen, and we're talking about crypto. What do you find in that kitchen? So I was trying to find the way to get people to not just be very analytic, or even worse, say what they heard in the news directly, like just parroting what they thought was the right answer. There's no right answer. It's you who's going there and imagining what you might find using your imagination, not what, Elon or whoever says about what the future is. And so that was, there were a couple of things going on there. And it was also sort of derived from an experience I had when I was doing my PhD. We had this seminar where it was just like a course number and a general enough description of the course that you could basically come up with your own curriculum. And that was really a kind of wonderful thing, because you all of a sudden, I mean, I guess it's also good for people who are getting a PhD. It's like, you got to figure out, if you're going to put together a curriculum, if you're going to someday teach, like, how to do that. And that, yeah, I don't know. There's just a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And I did that at least once. You get enough people together to say, here's a topic. And it was always, my understanding was that it should be something at the vanguard. In other words, we're not going to sit around and talk about 19th century European art history, because that's already sorted. There's
Yeah.
nothing, we're not going to, what are we going to do there? I mean, you want something where it's like the basis of knowledge, like the epistemology is under question, or it's under development. There's no consensus about what the particular topic is. And I think we picked like critical social geography, something like that, where it's like we wanted to look at how space was the space that people occupy, like you know, um, physical space,
Mhm.
architecture, urban planning. Was People were wondering, how can we understand this with a social dimension attached? And there was a lot of social theory attached to it. And I was like, that sounds really cool. And my approach, my motivation, I think, was I'd been doing this kind of longitudinal research project that became part of my dissertation, which was on video games that represented physical, space, like cities in particular. So SimCity, I was looking at, analytically very closely, how does SimCity represent cities, and what are the questions we can wonder about the game, and how the game's implications of what a city uh is kind of curious to explore and ask questions about and wonder, and like, what are the opportunities. And then there was like the early days of first person point of view games. So one game was it's a terrible game, made by underwritten by the imprimatur of Daryl Gates, who was the not very cool police commissioner of Los Angeles at the time. And so he got himself involved in making video games about cops terrorizing around
Oh my God.
Los Angeles. And it was such a
Wait, he was the chief during like Rodney King, wasn't he? And like OJ Simpson, that whole like era of the night. Okay, yeah, that's what I remember him from. Because
he might have been the Rampart scandal. I don't know. Anyway, but he's a career police guy, but very very clearly law and order.
no, yeah,
Extreme. And so this is all, so then you're starting to be able to talk about how certain values can be embedded into video games, which isn't a surprise, but you have a case study and an argument and you're a grad student. It's like, oh, this is gonna be great. And there weren't a lot of video game studies at the time. So I was interested in trying to find a theoretical framework to talk about these things, aside from just saying like, man, the action is pretty cool, but the politics are shit. I have to be a little bit more articulate when you're a grad student. So that was what something like this seminar that we had in grad school. And I was like, could I do the same thing in, a topic where no one's an expert, but you get in a room with a bunch of clever, bright, insightful people who are articulate and can wonder about it themselves without coming in saying like, I'll tell you what this is. Just coming and being like, oh, here's what I see, here's what I understand, here's what I appreciate, and I think maybe is related to this. You just have a discussion. And so that was kind of basic architecture for general seminar, which then later became super seminar because I recognized that the people loved it. They're like, this is great. When are you going to do the next one? And that kind of thing. And super seminar was just like a little bit of a flip to say, I think at one point I was like, my 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 marketing was like TED is dead and super seminar is the new, like, let's we don't, I don't know, maybe I was playing dangerously with the idea of the decline of the expert, but it's like we had an expert on stage to hold forth. Like we're smart people. We could be on the stage just as much as they could. So why don't we just kind of get together and wonder about a topic? And that's when I would sort of I I would have people I know in my community who, maybe who had a perspective rather than it just being an open discussion, they would kind of like prompt the discussion. So it wasn't so much a presentation as it was kick us off. So which is what we would do in the seminar in grad school. It's like each week when we met, one person would sort of be taking lead based on, kind of what we had read for that week. And they would be the interlocutor who would start the discussion almost salon like, okay, so here's what I'm seeing, here's what I think might be a good area to focus. And they would sort of hold forth or read something or deliver something in to start the conversation. It would be like maybe like a 15-minute kickoff discussion where everyone would listen, and then we would have responses going on around the seminar table. And so it was a similar sort of thing with super seminar, which is like, let me get Kevin Bethune, like let me he's got a bunch of stuff that he could share. Let me have him start, and then we would kind of go around and people would add their contribution. Usually ended up, kind of posing a question or pushing back on a point or stretching a point a little bit further. And I found that really really interesting too. And people wanted it to where they would pay for it. And that to me, it's not so much about the commercial thing as it is to say there's value in this kind of work.
right.
And
There's validation in the people will compensate because they appreciate your time
they
and people's
appreciate the
time.
time and and they
Right.
recognize that there's something for them in it.
Yeah.
And all those things I think are really important in this space. Again, I'm not primarily, and maybe to a fault, motivated by the commercial opportunities, but I do recognize the importance of value circulation in one form or another. And that means if you want to participate in this, you have to show that you have to feel for yourself that it has value. And for better or worse, one of the ways which we do that at this point in the history of value creation is we give someone folding money. Say like, thanks for that. I appreciate it. That's good. That's helping me.
Yeah, and it's also a lot of times as a fellow artist, you just want to share it with the world. And it's almost like there's a guilt in like the taking the idea of commerce. Because there's almost like I feel like like I don't speak for you, but I want to hear your perspective. There's almost like a guilt. Like I don't want to, you're giving me money is like, you're going because you think I'm a starving artist, or are you supporting me? Like, or is there, but I just want to share it with you, and I don't want to feel guilty. Like but at the same time, you're right. Like, I happily, pay to come to your seminar, because one of the things you kind of offhandedly, because you like to create, but I view your community as a creation too. I mean, for those of you who don't know, and I'll also put this in the link in the show notes. There's a wonderful Discord community, and there's a lot of Discords out there. I wish there was a way to like just hide or group like the Discord icons, like the ones you're kind of active on, because like you're one of my top ones. Like I love going in and just, and you have what 10, 15,000 people right now, I think, in that
No, it's
community.
just like 1,200.
What's that?
It's like 1,200, I think.
I thought it was like 10. I thought it was more than that. But the thing about it, okay,
Well,
not even that quantity, but there's a vibrancy. People are always, there's a lot of conversation in that. And there's, you want something that long tail, but the community itself are all people that are they're deeply futures fluent, futures engaged, practicing in some way. And I don't know. I always think of communities like this, or just like a super seminars. I'm a big fan of the kind of Gilded Age of history. I really am fascinated, but there's different periods. But I think of, I live here in Boston, and in the West, there's the Berkshires, and they used to have these, they were called quote unquote cottages, I mean, they're mansions. But Edith Wharton's cottage still survives. It's called the Mount. And you walk into this thing, and it's like Downton Abbey. It's like you walk in and you imagine like they have somebody over for the wealthy to listen, and they all have conversations, but it was such a small group, right? And it's like, now you think about it, you can have like super seminar where people can really be in that kind of environment, but it's for the world. And I think that's just the beauty of where we are in creating these spaces. um I don't know if you want to react to that, or how you think about that, but I just I think about your work, and people who now do design fiction and do this type of speculative work. I mean, how do you've seen this journey? How do you see it change? What do you see for the next 5, 10 years? I mean, as a future, the possible futures of design fiction, do you see it as much more common with people? Do you think GPT will help people write better, synthesize that kind of work? Like, where do you see, this part of the field and the space growing? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I guess part of me feels like I I'm looking forward to its evolution, and I'm not sure how much I will be involved in that. Only to say that I think things should evolve, and I'm curious what the generation that is coming up, maybe. Yeah, I oftentimes do like little bits at um in educational context. Like I'm going to USC tomorrow. I'm doing two separate talks that I had to coordinate to be on the same day, so I'd have to do two separate trips down there.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're talking to students, right, who are merging into their practice, and
Mhm.
very grateful for the for faculty integrating it into their curriculums and that kind of stuff globally. So it's super fascinating. So I'm curious how it is adopted and taken up and evolved by the generation or two behind where I am, professionally. Like, what will it become? And I guess maybe that's just like a little bit of an allergic reaction to being to stasis and fighting to kind of. I want to see what the kids do with with it. I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but it's like, um, blues became rock and roll. Like that's got to happen. And so
Mhm.
I want to see what happens. Design fiction becomes what in practice. So I, I guess one little hope is like I feel like it's got exceptional value in lots of different realms that I just haven't been able to focus on. Me coming from product design, I think about it in commercial contexts,
Yeah.
and I guess coming from um, other realms, I found that people have wanted to figure out how to integrate it into other contexts. So late last year, I worked with a a workshop for a couple of days with pretty analytic, pretty serious policy people around the topic of AI, and I hadn't really thought about design fiction directly in the context of policy, but learning about what policy does and how it operates, and how an approach like design fiction can be integrated into that has been super fascinating. And occasionally you just find people within that space who are expansive enough in their thinking that they can be like, okay, I think we need to, if we're going to innovate in policy, we have to do more than just communicate what we believe are good structures around things like AI through a policy white paper, that not a lot of people are going to read, or maybe the wrong people kind of people are going to read. I don't mean wrong in the bad way, but just kind of people who are not, or ungrounded. In other words, they're not living in the world that the policy is meant to uh, implicate. But they're not normal humans who are just kind of going about their day, all of a sudden wondering, why is this? What is this new rule about? What my refrigerator must do? Where'd that come from? Whose idea was it to integrate this into, or a, in a more kind of pedestrian sense, like, how come all the traffic lights are being taken down? I don't get what's going on here. Because some policy said, like, this is a waste of time and money and resources, because now most vehicles drive themselves and know how to coordinate negotiating an intersection. You don't need the traffic lights anymore. I mean, these are extreme examples, but I'm trying to.
No, but you push the boundaries out, and then it makes people go, huh? And then you can bring them back. You can backcast into those things. So that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Uh, when you at USC, is this the film school or is this the?
One talk is at the film school, and one school is at the Dr. Dre school. I can't remember what it's called, like the Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre. I can't remember his real name. They started an innovation school at USC. They wrote a big check, or promised that they would write a big check, and so there's a workshop going on for through the weekend. I think it starts Friday and goes through the weekend, and then on kind of innovation in the AI space. So they asked me to come in and just kind of um, get people excited to kick off that workshop. And then the other one is with the film school. So it was with Alex McDowell, total hero, designer, Minority Report, Blade Runner, etc. He asked me to come and do a talk in his class.
That's great. Yeah, Alex McDowell is a legend in the world building. So, oh yeah, he's great.
Humbled.
Love that. I'd love to have. Yeah, I think he's someone I would love to have a conversation with here on Think Forward. Just that the journey he takes. Well, when you explain it, you're going to talk to these students who maybe have heard the term, maybe know what it is, maybe probably don't know what it is at all. Like when you introduce someone to the concept, what are the misconceptions people have? Because they'll think of design fiction, maybe they'll see science fiction. Like what happens when you first kind of introduce people to this?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are. I'll be generous and say it's not a misconception. It's like these terms are preloaded with their kind of meaning and sense of what it is to people. When you say design fiction, it's a little bit of a, that it was, I guess to a certain degree, being provocative to say, let's bring these two things together. There are all kinds of design and all kinds of fiction, but have we put them together very deliberately and said it out loud, design fiction, and then wonder what that might actually be and how it might operate. And so it requires a bit of explanation, usually through, this is what it is, kind of in text, and it's like, now let me show you some examples of it. And I think you can go through enough examples where they're like, okay. And so you're saying it's it's the representation of possible futures in the form of a material cultural artifact. People are like, what's a material cultural artifact? It's like, okay, good question. Imagine that you're an archaeologist, but rather than digging into the past through the ground, you're actually rooting around in the future, because check it out, you got a time machine. In this time machine, you can go into possible futures. It's not a very good time machine because you're not sure exactly where you're going to end up. and you only have you don't have a limited amount of time when you're there. And one of the things about this kind of quantum entangled time travel is that you can't actually talk to people. You're not on their plane, but you can see artifacts, you can see objects. Uh, and so what you're able to do, like an archaeologist, is grab an artifact, and that becomes like like the traditional, the trad archaeologists. They have an artifact, and they their entire career is spent puzzling over it. What is it? What does it mean? Where did it come from? What does it represent about this world? And they have to tell a story about that world. Now, they might not say that they're storytellers, but they are telling a story to help us imagine into what that world could have been and what it was like. What were its power structures? What was its forms of value exchange? What were its hierarchies? Did it have something understood as a family unit? And so, how did it operate? Was it extended? All these kinds of things are what the archaeologist is trying to do. With the assumption that this will help us understand where we've come from. What I'm trying to do is the same thing, to say, wonder into where are we getting to, or where do we want to get to? What is that? What is our success condition for ourselves as beings in this world in some possible future? And to doing that less through prose, so it's not prose fiction, but it's an object that feels like it's not quite, it's a little bit here and now. I sort of recognize it, just like you might, in the trad archaeologists, they might come and it's like, this looks like um, a bowl, and maybe this bowl was used to eat out of. You look at it and it's familiar in that sense. It's not completely alien. It's evocative of something that you can sense and feel into as a person existing in the here and now. Can you do the same thing with objects that feel like they could come from a possible future? And can you make them evocative enough to get someone to say, like, okay, I sort of getting a sense this is kind of interesting here. It's got a kind of form to it that feels familiar, or actually that's crazy. It's got an Apple logo on it. Huh. I wonder what's up with that. And you start getting it, you connecting it into feelings. And the overall goal isn't to predict what it might look like. It's fun to, kind of work these things through and create the artifacts and that kind of thing. The thing you're trying to do is kick someone's imagination into gear, is to really kind of give a shock to the system, to be like, oh yeah, now we're doing something. We're opening up a conversation about what could be and about the future. So my meta goal is to just get people to imagine harder. Like, remember that we've got this evolutionary advantage of being able to imagine the world otherwise. Now, I don't know if it's true, but it's fun to think that we are particularly well suited as humans with this kind of lump of vascularized meat in our head that we call brain, to be able to do that, to imagine into possibility. And part of doing design fiction is to do the design fiction, but also remind ourselves that we have this existentially vital capability to imagine. It's kind of remarkable. We can imagine something,
Yeah.
and actually create it. I was talking to some architects the other day. What you guys do is amazing. I mean, you have this image in your head of a thing that could be, and then you go through these steps. You articulate it and represent it in different ways. You might make a model, you might make a 3D render, and at some point someone's like, I feel your imagination to such a degree that I'm gonna write you a check, and now can you get your engineers together and start pouring concrete? I mean, that to me is just like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Or same thing with film, all these different ways in which we imagine and instantiate our imagination, from artists to, God bless them, the people who make financial models, who are as much doing fiction as anyone else, because it's
Oh yeah, exactly. I was to say, yeah, some from financial forecast. Yeah, that's definitely a piece of design fiction.
yeah.
Projections. Well, that leads to one of the questions I've also had to deal with a lot as in doing innovation work and product work, dealing with strategists that are more forecasters. I would say more short term than not in terms of that long term strategy. Like, let's just take for example, like how to incorporate. How can people do this? Is my question to you. But I'll cite an example. Doing your user experience design, we do a lot of you do persona work, right? You create personas. So
Mhm.
I changed the name. I called them persona. The the story of a persona or the persona story or like a person of the future. Like I changed the name of it because a lot of times people almost like they have a reaction to fiction, the word for design. Like what is, it's like stories, persona stories, like just changing the thing so that there's like almost a semantic, easier acceptance. When you're talking to the students and they're going to go out in the world, how do you, when you talk to, your clients or people that are thinking about it, just like you talked about the architect, how do you get them to like meaningfully incorporate this stuff? Like how do you work with them to kind of teach to fish?
Yeah, I guess I just teach them. I mean, I usually,
You just teach them.
the, the simple thing is like these kind of go along with like what I sort of refer to as like design fiction 101,
Yeah.
which is, what is it? How do you do it? And then actually doing it in a either, like a case that is relevant to them or actually a problem that they're trying to work through. And if it's a problem that they're trying to, so if there's a problem that they're trying to work through, it's usually a much more longitudinal engagement. If it's like they're just like, we want a sense of what this is and how it works, then it's usually like, they just gotta go through, learn about what it is, and then get the workbook and work through a bunch of problems that are more like yeah, remember you like learning calculus or whatever? There was the problem sets at the back of each chapter that you just got to work through, and you're not trying to solve a problem in a instrumental sense. You're not trying to figure out how we're going to get this rocket booster to separate at the right rate or whatever. You're just kind of going through hypotheticals, and I think doing the hypotheticals, it's like, if you run, I mean, I don't know, if you ride a bike, you're and cycling enthusiast, so you're really into cycling. There might be something that you're working towards, like a race or whatever. But whatever you do, you just gotta keep riding your bike, and you gotta have a routine with it. I think doing this kind of work is similar. Like you just need to do a lot of it, but as a daily routine. And at first it hurts, just like when you start riding a bike or running or doing Pilates or lifting weights, whatever it is that you do. At first it hurts, but you know that there's a fitness goal that is just general, like I just want to feel fit, I want to feel better or whatever. And you sort of start working towards that. I think, doing these kinds of things is similar. Like you should do it. Yeah, do a little design fiction exercise like 2 or 3 times a week, 20 minutes at
There
a
you go.
time. And just as a routine, because that instills that sense of, I think it bulks up the imagination. So you got a really, really fit imagination, and it gets you thinking beyond the, the constraints of expecting someone else to come up with an idea or just parroting some other idea that you heard. It moves beyond the kind of hygienic responses to like, what's the future of AI? Like I haven't heard any kind of articulate statement
Yeah.
about that. Really, when it comes down to like, oh, we'll be able to have conversations with Uber's 10K filing. It's like, okay, now you're really struggling. But we don't know what the answer is, and we can accept that we don't know what the answer is, but we should be exploring the possibility space expansively, like doing things that don't necessarily, imagining things that don't necessarily directly make any sense. And that was one thing that I did with the policy group was, I came to that workshop with a newspaper that I called Applied Intelligence, Tomorrow's News Today, which I thought was fun. And the idea was to create a newspaper, an artifact that had come from an AI future that really looked around the boundaries of what that future might be like and what might it be like to live in a world where AI is just as normal, ordinary, and everyday as like a Wi-Fi connection at a coffee shop. What does that world look like and feel like? And I think that for me, because I did the newspaper, like a that was like a that was like a wonderful, like feeling really good about doing like a marathon. Like, yeah, that was harder, but I enjoyed it, and I think that's because like I'm doing these things routinely. I feel like getting to a state where that is possible, where people are as enthusiastic about doing it as they are about jogging or whatever people are doing, rucking, uh, then we're in a good place. And I think again, that's back to that meta goal of we need to use our we need to remind ourselves that we have an imagination, and we need to use it. Like, we need to remind ourselves that we have this important capacity and ability that I feel like is it maybe diminished a bit. I might be overstating it for the purposes of being evangelical. We need to imagine harder.
No, that's a great term to kind of as closing on this conversation, because you're going to talk to all these students tomorrow, and it's good advice for them to make that kind of impact. You look back, you have many more years ahead, but I always like to ask about the legacy question. Having your work remembered, like the impact, like what would you like that to be when people look back and think about Julian and the amazing work you've done? So
If I getting the feeling that I've touched people and shaped their way of thinking, and
yeah,
their sense of what their own possibility, and it was centered around this idea of imagine harder. Like, I learned how to imagine from that guy. That'd be great. That'd be amazing.
yeah, it's a wonderful way to think about it. So for those who want to find you, because you have such amazing content out there, like what's coming up for you that you'd like people to know about, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can find me at nearfuturelaboratory.com or julianbleecker.com, which is more or less a trimmed down version of that. And we got everything's on there. We got the podcast, which is just the Near Future Laboratory podcast. And we got a newsletter, which is a bit infrequent, all the usual kind of platforms and stacks. Patreon, these are all places where you can find me.
And I'll put that it'll be all in the show notes for people listening. You want to check it out too. So I'll have links for that.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you for the time today, Julian. It's been always a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking for me to join you, Stephen. It's been wonderful talking to you as well.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.